My name is Karen Foster. I'm 45 years old, and last weekend I skipped lunch, drove 3 hours to help my mom fix her roof, only to find out my sister had already been there. With cake. When I arrived, Mom looked at me like I was interrupting something. "Oh, I didn't think you were coming. Mandy already took care of it," she said, smiling as if that explained everything. I nodded, swallowed the sting, then quietly replied, "Maybe it's time I stop showing up. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, and subscribe if you're ready to hear a story about quiet sacrifice, painful truth, and the moment one woman finally chose herself." I got back in my car, sat in the driveway for a minute, and stared at the steering wheel. The smell of hot upholstery filled the silence. I could still see Mom and Mandy inside the living room through the curtains, laughing, like I hadn't even been there. I drove home without turning on the radio. That's usually my little ritual, old country music, windows down, but that day, the silence felt more honest. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun was setting, casting this bluish hue across the kitchen. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and saw the unopened bottle of wine I had bought. It was supposed to be a little celebration. Maybe Mom will finally notice how much I do, I had thought. Stupid, right? I live alone in a small but clean apartment above the town pharmacy. Rent's not bad, and it's walking distance to the firm where I've been a senior accountant for the last 12 years. I keep my place tidy. Everything has a label. My coworkers tease me for color-coding my files, but they also come to me when they're in trouble. I'm the person who has it together, and I thought that counted for something. The next morning, I was the first one in the office. Again. I brought coffee for the team. Again. No one noticed. Again. By 10:30, my phone buzzed. It was my mom. A text. "Can you send $300 for the plumber? The bathroom's leaking again. Dad's too stressed to deal with it." No greeting, no punctuation, no thank you. Just another withdrawal from the emotional ATM of Karen Foster. I didn't even hesitate. I transferred the money during my lunch break, skipped eating. Again. Later that day, I passed by a shoe store on Main. There was this beautiful pair of navy blue flats in the window. Soft leather, simple, elegant, on sale. I walked in, tried them on. They fit like a glove. I took out my wallet, and then I put them back. I told myself it was the responsible thing to do. But if I'm being honest, it wasn't about the money. It was about the guilt. The same guilt that's been quietly shaping every decision I've made for the last 20 years. That night, I worked late. Everyone else had gone home by 6, but I stayed behind to finish a report that wasn't even mine. I didn't mind. I told myself I liked the quiet. I liked being useful. But as I sat there, surrounded by fluorescent light and the hum of the AC, I caught my reflection in the window. My own face staring back at me, tired, pale, older than I remembered. And that's when the whisper came. That quiet, persistent voice I've spent years trying to silence. "What about you, Karen?" I shook it off, went back to typing. But that voice, it didn't leave. It followed me home. It crawled into bed with me. It was there when I brushed my teeth, folded my laundry, checked my bank account, responded to another "Can you help us out?" text from my dad. It was getting louder, not angry, not bitter, just tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of always being the one who held everything together, tired of smiling through silence. But I wasn't ready to admit that. Not yet. Because in my heart, I still believed that if I just kept showing up, if I just kept doing the right thing, they'd finally see me. And maybe, just maybe, they'd say, "Thank you." They never did. When Saturday rolled around, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee while staring at the same family photo I've seen 1,000 times. It's the one from our last holiday. Dad in the center, grinning at the camera, Mom with her arm around Mandy, and me off to the side, half smile fading into the background. Every time I look at it, I'm reminded of my place, always the reliable one, never the star. My phone buzzed with a group chat notification. It was Mom sharing a photo of Mandy holding a plate of freshly baked cookies. The caption read, "Our sweet girl always makes the best treats." 6 little heart emojis followed. I typed a thumbs-up emoji and watched the conversation move on without a single "Didn't Karen ever bake for us?" or "I miss your cookies too." Nothing that would acknowledge my name. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Mom and Dad's house under the pretense of dropping off a gift card for a local plumber. I carried it in one hand and a box of that same wine I never got to open. I told myself it was an act of love. The door swung open before I could ring the bell. There stood Dad in his well-worn cardigan, looking pleased to see me, but only for a moment. "Oh, Karen," he said. "You're just in time. Mandy has a surprise for you." He stepped aside. Mandy emerged from the living room, brandishing a plate piled high with her perfect uniform cookies. She tossed her hair, beamed, and offered me the plate like it was a peace treaty. "Try one, Karen," she said, laughing. I smiled, took a cookie, and bit into the soft dough. It was delicious. Flaky edges, buttery center, with just enough chocolate chips. I tried to match her enthusiasm. "These are really good." Then I asked about the roof, the leaks, anything I could latch onto. Mandy shrugged and said, "Mom said she had it all taken care of." Her tone was light, but the words carried a weight that sunk to my chest. Mom appeared behind Mandy, brushing flour off her hands. She wrapped an arm around my sister's shoulders and said, "Your sister's such a blessing, always so thoughtful." I watched them exchange sympathetic smiles, as if I were an outsider at my own family gathering. I cleared my throat. "Actually, Mom, I covered the roof last week. I drove 3 hours, paid the contractor." I stopped. Nobody looked at me. They both turned their heads toward Mandy's plate like it was the only thing that mattered. In that moment, I felt a twinge of something I'd been pushing down for years. That quiet ache I mistook for devotion. I realized that no matter how much I contributed, time, money, energy, it would never earn me a seat at their table, not like Mandy's cookies or her bright smile. I left without a goodbye. Outside, I pressed my back against the door and slid down until I was sitting on the wooden porch steps, knees pulled close. I closed my eyes and let the afternoon sunlight warm my face. A breeze carried the sweet scent of baked goods through the air, mocking me with memories of a time when I believed love could be measured in actions, not words. I spent my life believing that if I just did enough, they'd finally see me. I was wrong. As I drove home, the road stretched out empty before me. No music again, just me and my thoughts. I thought about the time I stayed up all night editing Dad's retirement speech. No one ever said thanks. I thought about every dinner I cooked, every bill I paid, every request I dropped everything to fulfill. All those moments. Invisible. That night I sat at my desk and opened a blank document on my laptop. I typed a title in bold letters, "To myself." Then I began to write the words I never heard from them. This is the start of something new. Not for them, but for me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. Monday came fast. I was at my desk before the sun was even up, sipping coffee that tasted like burnt toast and exhaustion. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own thoughts sound louder than they should. I booted up my computer, scanned through emails, and tried to settle into another forgettable start to the week. Then my phone lit up. "Hey, honey, sorry to bug you," Mom texted. "But the water heater's acting up again. Think you can help us out this time, too?" No good morning. No how are you. Just another transaction, like I was a utility company instead of a daughter. I sighed, tapped open my banking app, and transferred another $400 to their account. I didn't even blink. I just did it. That afternoon, I walked into the break room and heard 2 coworkers laughing about something on Instagram. They were planning a weekend getaway, something spontaneous and light. I stood there with my frozen lasagna, smiled politely, and heated up my lunch in silence. I didn't join the conversation. I wasn't part of those kinds of plans. My life wasn't built for spontaneous. As I sat in the corner with my food, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Dad. "Karen, the insurance forms for the house came back. I can't figure them out. Can you stop by this weekend?" I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the message. I could feel the weight pressing down on my shoulders like bricks, one after another. I'd helped them with those same forms last year. I organized every document, made them a printed folder with color-coded tabs. Apparently, that folder didn't survive Mandy's spring cleaning spree. I typed out, "Sure, I'll come by after work Saturday," and hit send. I didn't even give myself time to say no. That night, as I was brushing my teeth, I caught a glimpse of my reflection again. The same tired eyes, the same tight smile. I looked like someone who had everything under control. But inside, I felt hollow. Later, I found myself scrolling through an old photo album on my laptop. Birthdays, school plays, Thanksgiving dinners. In almost every picture, Mandy was in the center, smiling, glowing, being lifted in someone's arms. I was usually off to the side, holding a dish, fixing someone's collar, half in frame. I closed the laptop and turned off the lights. The next day, I had lunch with Emily, a co-worker I used to be close with before life got too loud. We sat at a cafe by the courthouse, sipping tea and trying to act like it wasn't awkward. Halfway through our meal, she asked, "Do you ever take time for yourself?" I laughed a little too hard. "I don't even remember what that means." She tilted her head. "Seriously, Karen, you're always giving. Doesn't it wear you down?" I looked at her, unsure what to say. Because the truth was, yes, it did wear me down, but admitting that felt dangerous. Like once I said it out loud, I'd have to change something. And change was scary. When I got back to the office, I found a sticky note on my desk from my manager. "Thanks for covering for Matt while he's out. You're a lifesaver." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I didn't even remember agreeing to cover for Matt. But of course I had. I always did. That evening, back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the dark. I thought about Mandy, about how everyone always said she had a bright spirit, how they called her fun and full of life. I wondered if anyone ever described me that way, or if I was just the safety net, the steady one, the one who showed up, paid the bills, and never asked for anything in return. And then I realized I didn't know what I looked like when I wasn't carrying everyone else's weight. I couldn't picture her, but maybe it was time I tried. Saturday came with gray skies and a steady drizzle, the kind that makes everything feel heavier than it should. I drove the familiar road to my parents' house, windshield wipers ticking like a quiet metronome. I wasn't excited to be there. I wasn't even curious anymore. I was just fulfilling another silent obligation. When I pulled into the driveway, Mandy's car was already there, bright red, spotless as always. I sat for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, staring at that car like it had something to say. Inside the house, the smell of cinnamon and cloves wrapped around me before I even got to the kitchen. Mandy was at the counter, humming to herself while arranging cookies on a tray. Mom hovered behind her like a proud assistant to the star baker. "Karen," Mom said, not quite surprised, but not exactly welcoming either. "We weren't sure you'd make it. Mandy just made these amazing snickerdoodles. Want one?" I glanced at the cookies, then at Mandy. She didn't look up. "No thanks. I'm here about the insurance papers," I said. Dad was in the den, papers spread across the coffee table in that familiar tornado of confusion. I spent the next hour sorting through them, highlighting important dates, explaining terms he wouldn't remember 10 minutes later. He nodded along, grateful in that distracted way he always was, like he appreciated the help but had already moved on to what was for dinner. When I finished, I asked if there was anything else they needed. Mom popped her head in. "Actually, could you take Mandy's car to the shop this week? It's been making a weird noise, and you're always good with that sort of thing." I blinked. Mandy was right there, perfectly capable. But no one asked her. They asked me. I looked at Mandy. She was sipping tea and scrolling through her phone. "Why can't Mandy take it?" I asked, keeping my tone level. Mom waved a hand. "She's been so stressed lately. She just lost her job, poor thing. You know how hard that is." I opened my mouth, closed it again. Something inside me twisted. Not anger. Not quite. It was something older than that. Something tired. I left the house without answering. That evening, I stopped by the grocery store. I picked up what I needed, just a few essentials, and passed the wine aisle. The same bottle from the week before caught my eye. I reached for it, and this time I didn't put it back. At home, I poured a glass, pulled out a blank notebook, and sat on the couch. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty for resting. I didn't feel like I had to justify my choices to anyone. I started to write. Not a journal entry, not a letter, just thoughts, raw and unedited. Like, why is Mandy always the one who gets grace? Why is my effort invisible? And how much of myself do I have to lose before I become someone they notice? The next morning, my phone rang at 7:12 a.m. It was Mom. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, a text. "Mandy's upset. She thinks you're pulling away. Please call." I stared at the message. Pulling away? I'd been anchored to this family my whole life. I had held them up through job losses, doctor appointments, car breakdowns, and emotional meltdowns that never belonged to me. And now, because I didn't want to drive a car to a mechanic, I was the problem? I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my notebook again and wrote one word in capital letters. Enough. Not out of rage, not out of spite, but because somewhere in the silence a new version of me had started whispering. And this time, I was ready to listen. The following week I worked late almost every night, not because I had to, but because I didn't want to go home to the quiet, or worse, to the guilt. Guilt had become my shadow. It followed me through every mundane task, pouring coffee, sending emails, folding laundry. It whispered that I was selfish for needing space, that good daughters didn't ignore their mother's calls, that I was the one changing, not them, and maybe that meant I was the problem. But there was another voice too, softer, but steady, and it was beginning to get louder. On Wednesday, I got a call from my cousin Rachel. We hadn't spoken in months. She asked if I wanted to grab lunch. We met at a little place near the library, one of those spots with creaky wooden floors and too many ceiling fans. We made small talk at first, weather, work, her kids' science projects, and then she looked at me and said, "Your mom called. She said you've been distant." I laughed into my coffee. "Is that the word she used?" "She said you're not being yourself, that you're withdrawing." I stirred a packet of sugar into my cup, watching it dissolve. "Maybe I am, or maybe I'm just tired." Rachel nodded slowly. "You've been carrying them for a long time." That sentence sat between us for a moment, heavy and true. I told her about the roof, about the money, the never-ending list of favors, and the way Mandy always seemed to float through everything, wrapped in compliments and second chances. Rachel leaned in. "You know, when my brother and I were kids, he was the one who always caused a scene, and somehow that made him the center of everything. I was the easy one, the one who didn't ask for much. And you know what happens to people like us?" I didn't answer. "We disappear," she said. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying our conversation. The idea of disappearing hit me like a brick. I'd never put words to it before, but that's exactly how it felt. Like I had slowly faded out of the family photo until I was just background. I opened an old journal, the kind I hadn't written in since college. The first page had a list of goals. Finish degree, buy my own place, travel to Italy, start a garden. I hadn't done any of those things. Instead, I had checked off an entirely different list. One no one ever asked me to write. Pay mom's electric bill, help Mandy find an apartment, drive dad to 5 doctor's appointments in 1 month, reorganize the basement. I turned the page and started a new list, just for me, no one else's name on it. And that's when it hit me. Maybe the reason I'd never been seen was because I never let myself take up space. I was so busy accommodating everyone else that I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. The next day, I didn't answer when Mom called. I didn't reply when Mandy sent a vague text asking, "Are you mad at me or something?" Instead, I took the long way home. I stopped at the park, watched kids play on swings, and listened to a street musician play a sad little tune on his violin. I sat there for almost an hour, doing nothing, and for once I didn't feel guilty about it. Later that night, I wrote a single sentence in my journal. "I'm not angry. I'm just done performing." It was quiet, but it was the loudest truth I'd spoken in years. On Sunday morning, I woke up to the smell of rain and the sound of my phone buzzing like a mosquito in the dark. It was Mom, again. I didn't answer. A minute later, a text came in. "Mandy lost her temp job. She's devastated. Can you talk to her? Maybe help her figure things out?" I stared at the message, my thumb hovering above the screen. Then I locked the phone and set it face down on the kitchen counter. It wasn't that I didn't care. I did. But I was starting to realize that caring didn't mean carrying. And I'd been carrying my family's weight for so long that I forgot what my own life even felt like. I made myself eggs and toast, sat by the window and watched the rain trail down the glass. The quiet was unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. That afternoon, I walked to the bookstore downtown, the one I used to visit in my 20s before every weekend became about fixing something or helping someone. I wandered the aisles like I was in a museum, running my fingers along the spines of books I didn't know I'd missed. I bought 3, one on poetry, one on personal boundaries, and one called The Invisible Daughter. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I saw the title. I did a little of both. That evening, while I was curled up on the couch with a blanket and a mug of chamomile, my phone rang again. This time it was Mandy. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone even. Her voice was already shaky. "Did Mom tell you what happened?" "She mentioned something," I replied. "I got fired," Mandy said. "Again. I don't even know why this keeps happening. It's like nobody gives me a real chance." I waited. She kept talking. "And now Mom's making me feel worse. She keeps comparing me to you. Says you'd never let something like this happen." That caught me off guard. "She compared you to me?" I asked. "Yeah," Mandy said. "She said you're always reliable, always responsible, that you never let anyone down." I didn't know what to say. I'd spent years being overlooked in favor of Mandy, and now, suddenly, I was the yardstick. "Mandy," I said carefully, "I'm sorry you're going through a hard time. I know that must feel awful, but I need you to understand something. Being the responsible one hasn't been easy. It's come with a cost." She went quiet. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean, I've spent so much of my life picking up pieces that weren't mine, and for a long time I thought that made me strong. But now I realize it just made me exhausted." There was a pause. "I didn't know you felt that way," she said. "I didn't either," I told her. "Not really, but I do now." We didn't fix anything in that conversation. There were no grand apologies or emotional breakthroughs. But for once, I wasn't trying to smooth things over. I wasn't shrinking myself to make someone else comfortable. After we hung up, I opened the poetry book and read the first line. There's a kind of freedom in saying "not today." I closed the book and let the silence fill the room, because "not today" felt like the first real choice I'd made in years. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin again. The first time I let my phone ring without checking it, it felt like a small act of rebellion. The second time, it felt like breathing. I had stopped sending money 2 weeks ago. No more quick transfers, no more emergency Venmo requests. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't write a dramatic email or call a family meeting. I just stopped. At first, I thought there'd be panic. I expected texts, voicemails, guilt bombs exploding at my feet, but there was only silence. It was unsettling and strangely peaceful. A week into my quiet resistance, I took a walk through the neighborhood after work. It was golden hour, the sun dipping behind the rooftops, casting long shadows that made the sidewalk look like a painting. I hadn't taken an aimless walk in years. I'd forgotten how good it felt to move without a destination, just me, my steps, and a sky slowly changing colors. I passed a small park where kids were playing tag and 2 older women sat on a bench sharing a thermos of tea. They looked like they had nowhere to be, and for the first time, I wanted that kind of life. Not one built around obligation, but around choice. I kept walking. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I didn't check it, I just kept walking. Later that evening, I opened my freezer, saw the usual lineup of frozen dinners, and closed it again. Instead, I pulled out a recipe book I hadn't touched since I bought it 6 years ago and decided to make lemon chicken with roasted vegetables. It wasn't perfect. The potatoes were a little underdone and I used too much garlic. But I sat down at my little kitchen table, lit a candle, and ate without rushing, without multitasking, without checking emails between bites. After dinner, I put on music and cleaned the apartment while humming along. It was a song from my college days, one I hadn't heard in forever. I danced a little, alone. But it didn't feel lonely, it felt free. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. I poured coffee and sat by the window with a journal in my lap, not to write down a to-do list or track expenses, just to write. I wrote one sentence: I don't owe anyone my exhaustion. That became my mantra. That afternoon, I walked past the shoe store again. The navy blue flats were still in the window, still on sale. I walked in, tried them on again, and this time I didn't hesitate. I bought them. No guilt, no math in my head about which bill would suffer, just a quiet yes to myself. When I wore them to work the next day, no one noticed. But I did. I noticed how my posture changed, how I walked a little taller, how the sound of the heels on the floor made me feel grounded. That week, I started saying no more often. No to staying late, no to picking up extra shifts, no to being the catch-all for everyone else's chaos. And something amazing happened. Nothing fell apart. People adjusted. The world kept spinning. And I started to realize just how much I'd convinced myself that I was holding everything together, when really I was just holding myself hostage to a story that was never mine to begin with. Then, on Friday, Mom called again. This time, I picked up. Her voice was sharp, tight with frustration. "Karen, why haven't you been answering? I've been calling and calling." "I've been busy," I said simply. "Well, your father thinks there's something wrong with the car insurance. He needs you to look into it." I waited a beat. "He can call the company himself." Silence on the other end. "What's gotten into you lately?" she asked. "You've been so distant." "I'm not being distant," I said calmly. "I'm setting boundaries." Another pause. "You know, Mandy said you've been acting cold." I took a breath. "I'm not being cold. I'm just done being the family's unpaid assistant." She gasped like I'd cursed at her. "I'm your mother," she said. "You don't speak to me like that." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply said, "And I'm your daughter, not your employee." Then I hung up. My hands shook, but my heart didn't. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt like I'd just told the truth out loud. The day after I hung up on my mother, the sky felt brighter. Not because anything had changed, my family was still my family, but because I had said something I'd been swallowing for decades. The words hadn't come out polished. They came out raw, unfiltered, maybe even a little sharp. But they were mine. And it felt clean. I didn't hear from anyone for 3 days. Not a peep from Mom. No, "Can you take a look at this?" texts from Dad. No forwarded job postings from Mandy with the passive-aggressive, "Think you could help me apply?" subject line. It was so quiet I started to wonder if my phone had broken. I checked the settings. Everything was fine. They were just silent. At first I felt relief. Then I felt something else creeping in. Guilt? Maybe. But it was layered with something deeper, like I'd broken a rule no one told me existed, the rule of being the reliable one, the peacekeeper, the fixer. But rules built on exhaustion aren't rules, they're traps. By Thursday, the silence broke. Not with a phone call, but with a knock on my front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it cautiously, only to find all 3 of them, Mom, Dad, and Mandy, standing on the porch like a committee. Mandy had tears in her eyes. Mom's lips were tight. Dad looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Karen," Mom started, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, unsure what was coming, but too curious to slam the door in their faces. They filed into my living room like they were walking into a courtroom. I stayed standing. Mom spoke first. "You've been distant. You've ignored our calls. You've changed." Her tone wasn't angry. It was wounded. "I've set boundaries," I replied. "You've abandoned us," she snapped. "Mandy's struggling. Your father's health isn't great, and you just shut us out." Mandy chimed in, sniffling. "You're not acting like my sister anymore." Something inside me flinched, but I stayed still. "I've been acting like myself," I said quietly. "For the first time." Dad finally spoke. "We just don't understand why everything feels so cold all of a sudden." I looked at them, all 3 of them, and realized that for years they hadn't seen me. They'd seen a version of me that was useful, convenient, predictable. They didn't know this version, the one who could say no, the one who had limits. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out the notebook I'd been writing in. I flipped it open and held it out. "Do you want to know who I've been?" They looked confused. "This is where I write down every time I paid a bill for you. Every time I skipped dinner or canceled plans or stayed up all night worrying about Mandy's rent or Dad's insurance or Mom's never-ending list of things that needed doing." I handed it to Mom. She didn't take it. "I've done all of that without asking for anything. Not thanks, not recognition, just hoping one day it would feel like enough. But it never did. And not because I didn't give enough, but because no one ever stopped to notice that I was giving at all." Mandy started crying. Mom looked like she wanted to yell but couldn't find the words. Dad just stared at the carpet. "I'm not trying to punish you," I said. "I'm just done hurting myself to keep the peace." They left after that. No big scene, no screaming, just a quiet, awkward goodbye. Like they weren't sure what had just happened. After the door closed behind them, I sat down on the couch. The silence was back. But this time it felt like mine. I made tea, I read, I lit a candle that smelled like cedar and orange peel. And when I went to bed that night, I didn't replay the conversation. I didn't write it down. I didn't analyze it. I just slept. Because peace, it turns out, doesn't always come after applause or understanding. Sometimes peace is just the absence of pretending. The next morning, my phone was full of unread messages. Mandy had sent me a paragraph-long text about how she didn't mean to hurt me, how she was just under stress, and how it felt like I was punishing her for being the baby of the family. She ended it with a sad face emoji and a screenshot of her resume. Mom's message was shorter. I didn't raise you to turn your back on family. Dad, as usual, didn't text. He never did. He let Mom and Mandy carry the drama while he stayed in the background, nodding at the right times, silent when it mattered most. I didn't answer either of them. Instead, I went to work, finished a quarterly report 2 days early, and took a walk during lunch. I didn't bring my phone. I just walked. 10 blocks down, 10 blocks back. The air was crisp. My shoulders felt lighter. But as the week wore on, things escalated. It started online. A vague Facebook post from Mom showed up on my feed. It's heartbreaking when someone you love chooses selfishness over family. Some people forget where they came from. It didn't take long for aunts, cousins, and even family friends to jump in with comments. Sending love, Diana. You're a wonderful mom. Some people don't appreciate what they have. You don't deserve that. I stared at the screen, not angry, but stunned. I had expected silence, maybe cold shoulders. But this? Public martyrdom? Mandy joined in a few hours later with her own post. Just wish people would stop pretending they're perfect while others are struggling. Not everyone has it all figured out. Another wave of supportive replies. It was like watching a play unfold where I was cast as the villain, and no one had told me I got the part. At first I wanted to write something, a long, honest post about what it meant to be the one who always showed up, about the years I quietly paid their bills, answered their late-night calls, and canceled vacations to be there for birthdays they barely remembered. But I didn't, because I didn't need to prove anything. Instead, I opened my journal again and wrote, "When you stop playing the role they've assigned you, they call it betrayal." That night I had dinner with Teresa, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. We met at a little Italian place we used to love back in our 20s, when life was loud and full of possibilities. We ordered wine, laughed about bad first dates, and caught up on the decade we'd lost between promotions, moves, and the chaos of adulthood. At one point she looked at me and said, "You seem different, lighter." I smiled. "I think I finally stopped asking for permission to live my own life." She nodded. "That's no small thing." When I got home, I saw that Mandy had sent another message. Longer this time. Emotional, dramatic, full of half apologies and full-blown guilt trips. She wrote that she'd always looked up to me, but that I made it hard to be close because I never opened up. I sat with that for a moment. There was truth in it. I had built walls, but those walls were never to shut her out. They were to hold myself together. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off my phone and lit another candle. Lavender this time. I played music. Not sad music, not angry music. Just something soft. Piano and rain. And I let myself feel it. All of it. The grief of letting go. The relief of stepping away. The ache of still loving people who never really saw me. And somewhere between the flicker of candlelight and the piano notes, I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. I didn't want to go back. Not to the Karen who said yes to everything. Not to the Karen who equated love with sacrifice. Not to the Karen who thought her worth depended on being needed. That version of me was gone. And for the first time, I wasn't mourning her. I was finally meeting the woman she'd made room for. The next time Mom showed up, she didn't come alone. She brought guilt, shame, and a Tupperware full of her famous tuna casserole. I hadn't answered her calls in over a week. Maybe she thought food would fix it. Maybe she thought I'd open the door, hug her, and pretend nothing had happened. I almost didn't let her in. But something in her eyes looked off. Not angry, not smug, just desperate. I stepped aside. She walked in like she still owned the place, set the casserole on the counter, and looked around like she was checking for dust. "Still keeping it tidy," she muttered, more observation than compliment. I stood across from her, arms folded. "Why are you here, Mom?" She opened and closed her mouth. For a second I thought she might actually say something real. But instead, she launched into her usual performance. "Mandy's been crying nonstop. She feels like you don't love her anymore. Your father's blood pressure is up. Everyone is walking on eggshells because they don't know what happened to you." I didn't respond. I just leaned against the counter and let her talk. "You've always been the strong one, Karen," she continued. "The one we could count on. Whatever this is, it's not you." I took a breath and said, "It is me, Mom. You just never bothered to meet this version." She blinked. "What version is that?" "The one who's tired, who finally realized she's not obligated to burn out just to keep everyone else warm." Her face tightened. "Family means sacrifice." "No," I said calmly. "Family means support. It means reciprocity. It means seeing each other. Sacrifice without acknowledgement is servitude, and I'm not doing it anymore." She sank into a chair like I had slapped her. "So this is it? You're done with us?" I shook my head. "I'm done being invisible to you. There's a difference." She looked away, blinking fast. I walked over, sat across from her. For once, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I wasn't offering solutions or explanations. I was just being still in my truth. "I've spent my whole life thinking if I just gave a little more, you'd finally see me. That maybe one day you'd be proud of me the way you are of Mandy, for baking cookies, for smiling at the right time, for crying on cue. But it was never enough. And I've finally accepted that it never will be." There was silence. The kind that's so heavy it hums. Then she said, "I never meant to make you feel that way." "I know," I said. "But you did." She looked at her hands. "Your sister's not as strong as you, she's fragile." "And I'm not made of steel," I replied. She didn't cry. That would have been easier. She just sat there, quietly absorbing everything I said like it was a foreign language she'd never learned. One she might never understand. When she finally stood to leave, she turned to me at the door. "Are you coming to Mandy's birthday dinner next weekend?" I almost laughed. "No," I said. "I wasn't invited." Her mouth opened, but I raised my hand gently. "It's okay. I'm not angry. I'm just done forcing myself into places I'm not wanted." She stared at me for a long moment, nodded once, and left. The door clicked shut behind her like punctuation. I stood there in the quiet, and I felt clear. Later that night, I opened the fridge, saw the casserole, and debated whether to throw it out. But instead, I slid it onto a plate, warmed it up, and ate it at the table with a glass of wine and no noise but the hum of the refrigerator. Because here's the thing no one tells you. Healing doesn't always look like burning bridges. Sometimes it looks like eating a meal you didn't ask for, knowing it won't fix anything, but also knowing it won't undo you either. I didn't clean the plate, but I also didn't apologize. And that felt like growth. Sunday came, and with it the usual ache in my chest. Not quite sadness, not quite guilt. Just a dull weight I couldn't quite name. I knew what was happening that afternoon. Mandy's birthday dinner. The family would gather at our parents' house, the good plates would come out, the same playlist Mom always used would float in the background, and Mandy would be showered in compliments and casseroles. They'd toast her resilience, her charm, her big heart. My chair would be empty, but no one would say it out loud. I didn't get an invitation. But even if I had, I wouldn't have gone. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the coast. It was a long drive, almost 2 hours, but I didn't mind. I rolled the windows down, let the wind mess up my hair, and turned up the radio. For once, the music wasn't just background noise. It was permission. The beach was quiet when I arrived. Off-season, just a few couples walking their dogs, some kids chasing seagulls. I kicked off my shoes and walked toward the water, cold sand clinging to my toes. The air smelled like salt and freedom. I found a spot near a rock, sat down and pulled out the small notebook I'd started carrying in my purse. It wasn't fancy, just lined paper and a soft leather cover, but it had become my place to say the things I couldn't say out loud. I wrote, "I thought walking away would feel like failure, but it feels like breath, like waking up in my own life." A few pages later, I scribbled, "They told me love looked like sacrifice. I'm learning that love also looks like space." The waves rolled in and out. No fanfare, no applause, just rhythm, just truth. I watched the tide for what felt like hours. I thought about Mandy, about how she'd probably smile through dinner, maybe cry at some point for dramatic effect. I imagined Mom wrapping her in one of those too tight hugs, the kind that says more about ownership than affection. And I thought about my father, quiet, distant, the man who never raised his voice but also never raised his hand to help. He'd probably pour the wine, stay out of the drama, and act like silence made him innocent. I don't know if any of them missed me, but I missed me. The version of myself that existed before all the roles. Before I was the one who showed up, held it together, stayed quiet, paid the bill, smoothed the edges. That girl was curious, creative, a little wild. I hadn't seen her in decades. As the sun began to dip, casting orange streaks across the sky, I stood up and walked along the shoreline, letting the waves lick at my ankles. I didn't feel lonely. I felt alone. And there's a difference. Lonely is when you're longing to be seen. Alone is when you've finally seen yourself. On the drive home, my phone buzzed. A single text from Mom. "We missed you tonight." I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I didn't want to soothe her discomfort at the cost of my own clarity. When I got back to my apartment, I lit a candle and placed the sand-dusted notebook on the kitchen table. I poured myself a glass of water and took a long sip. Then I stood in front of the mirror and just looked. Not with judgment, not with criticism, just looked. And I whispered, like a vow only I needed to hear, "You don't have to go back." Because the truth was no longer a secret. I had crossed a line. Not out of spite, not to prove a point, but to finally choose myself. And I wasn't going to apologize for that. Not anymore. It started with a post. I wasn't even following Mandy anymore, but someone from high school tagged me in the comments. A friend of a friend. Curious, I clicked through. The picture was of a wilted bouquet in a trash can and a slice of half-eaten birthday cake sitting on a chipped plate. The caption read, "Some people only show up when it benefits them, but family is supposed to mean something. Not everyone understands that. Some of us give until there's nothing left." Dozens of hearts, a flood of supportive comments. "You deserve better. She's always been so cold. I'm sorry you're going through this. You have such a kind soul." I stared at the screen, not surprised, but still stunned. Somehow I had become the villain in someone else's redemption story. A few hours later, Mom chimed in with her own post. A blurry photo of Mandy as a child, flour on her nose, baking something in our old kitchen. The caption, "Always our little light. Some people dim that light without even realizing it, but the world sees her. We always have." My hands didn't shake, but my heart did. Because these weren't just posts. They were weapons. Polished, passive-aggressive weapons wrapped in nostalgia and shared grief. Not one message had been sent to me directly. No phone call, no effort to ask, "Are you okay?" Just a public parade of martyrdom. And I wasn't invited. I closed my laptop, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water and stood at the sink, letting the coolness settle me. For a moment I thought about disappearing, deleting social media, going quiet again. But then something inside me whispered, "No. Not this time." I opened my phone, sat at the table, and wrote, "I'm the eldest daughter, the dependable one, the quiet one, the one who shows up, pays the bill, reschedules her life to keep others from falling apart. I've done it for decades, not out of obligation, but out of love. But love without acknowledgement becomes erosion, and silence after a while turns into absence. So yes, I'm choosing space, I'm choosing peace, and I'm choosing myself, not because I don't care, but because I finally do. Please don't confuse that with cruelty, or abandonment, or coldness. It's called self-respect, and it's long overdue." I stared at the words, reread them twice, and hit post. No pictures, no emojis, no cryptic quotes, just truth. Within minutes, comments started rolling in. "Thank you for saying what so many of us feel. I see you. I've lived this. This made me cry. You're not alone." I didn't respond to any of them. I just let them exist. I let me exist. Mandy didn't reply. Neither did my mother. But a few distant relatives sent private messages, quiet, cautious acknowledgments, little notes that said things like, "I always wondered how you held everything together. You deserved more credit. Thank you for your honesty." And I realized something. Sometimes telling the truth doesn't fix the story, but it changes your role in it. That night, I slept with my phone on silent. For the first time in years, I didn't dream about forgetting something, missing something, or holding something together that was already falling apart. I just slept. Because telling the truth doesn't just set you free. It also helps you rest. 2 days after I posted my truth, I received an email from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Mrs. Granger, my high school English teacher. She wrote, "Karen, I saw your post. I just want you to know I always saw how steady you were, even as a teenager. You were the one holding everyone else together. I'm glad you're finally holding space for yourself." I sat at my desk reading those lines over and over. That someone, somewhere, had seen me back then, when I was quietly surviving behind perfect grades and polite smiles, felt like the kind of grace I didn't know I needed. Sometimes it's not the people closest to you who see the real version of you. Sometimes it's the ones on the periphery, the ones who weren't blinded by the roles your family handed out and expected you to keep playing forever. Later that night, I went for a walk. No destination, just me and the steady rhythm of my footsteps. The streets were calm. Porch lights glowed softly. I passed a couple walking their dog, and the woman smiled at me like she knew I was deep in thought. I smiled back. Halfway down the block, my phone buzzed. It was a message from a woman named Ellen. We'd worked together years ago, briefly, on a short-term project. Her message read, "Karen, I saw your post. I've been the oldest daughter, too. Thank you for saying what I never could. You put words to a kind of ache I've carried for decades." Another message came, then another, each one a quiet confession, each one a small act of connection. I thought I was alone. I didn't know anyone else felt this way. Your words gave me permission. I didn't cry, not then, but something cracked open. Not pain, just release. All my life I had been waiting for my own family to validate me, to see me, to thank me. And here were strangers doing what they never had. Not because they owed me anything, but because shared experience has a language of its own. A few days later, I bumped into Emily at the grocery store. She was the only one at work who had ever asked if I took time for myself. We stood near the coffee aisle, awkwardly pushing our carts and making small talk about deadlines and weather. Then, just as I was about to say goodbye, she said, "I read what you wrote. I wish I had that kind of courage with my sister." I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't judging me. She was standing beside me. "It wasn't courage," I said. "It was exhaustion." She laughed quietly. "Well, sometimes that's what finally gets us to speak up." We hugged, right there next to the dark roast and the vanilla creamer. When I got home that night, I sat on my bed and opened my journal again. I wrote, maybe I wasn't meant to be understood by the people I kept rescuing. Maybe I was meant to be witnessed by the people learning how to rescue themselves. Because that's what healing started to feel like. Not getting everyone to apologize. Not rewriting the past, just being seen, truly seen, and learning that sometimes the ones who see you aren't the ones you spent your life trying to impress. They're the ones who recognize the quiet kind of bravery, the kind that looks like saying no, the kind that looks like staying home on a birthday, the kind that looks like finally choosing yourself. The weekend came, and for once, I didn't feel like I had to fill it with tasks to prove my usefulness. No errands for anyone else, no drop-ins at my parents' house, no guilt-tripped visits to check on Mandy. Just time. Mine. All mine. Saturday morning, I brewed my coffee and sat on the balcony wrapped in a soft blanket. It was early enough that the world still felt quiet, like I had beaten everyone else to the day. I watched the sunlight creep over the rooftops and thought, so this is what peace sounds like. Around 10 a.m., I opened my email and found a message from a woman named Teresa I hadn't spoken to in years. We used to work together back when I first started at the firm. She was older, closer to retirement, and back then I remember admiring how she moved through the world with a kind of steady grace. Her message read, "Karen, I read your post last week. I wanted to tell you, you reminded me of myself 30 years ago. I didn't find my voice until I was almost 50. It's never too late to claim your life." I sat with that sentence like it was a cup of tea warming my hands. Never too late. The words rang louder than I expected. Later that afternoon, I wandered into a small boutique bookstore I'd passed a dozen times but never walked into. The kind with handwritten staff pics and a sleepy old cat stretched across the poetry section. I wasn't looking for anything, but I let my fingers run along the spines of books like I was searching for a conversation. An older woman behind the counter smiled as I walked by. "Looking for something in particular?" she asked. "No," I said, smiling back. "Just space." She nodded like she understood more than I said. I ended up leaving with a thin memoir about a woman who left everything behind to start again. I didn't realize it until I got home, but the subtitle read, "The Art of Beginning at the End." It felt like it had been waiting for me. That night, I read the first 3 chapters in one sitting. Then I set the book down and checked my phone out of habit. A new text from Mandy. It was a photo. A picture of a necklace I had given her for her 18th birthday. A tiny silver bird on a delicate chain. "I found this today," her message said. "Made me think of you. Hope you're okay." There was no guilt this time, no dramatic undertones, just a memory. I didn't know what to do with it. Part of me wanted to respond, to say I was okay, to say thank you, to crack the door open just enough. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at the photo. Remembered that birthday. How I saved up for weeks to buy that necklace, skipped dinners out and walked instead of driving just to make it work. I wrapped it in blue paper and watched her cry when she opened it. That moment had felt like something sacred. Then it was swallowed, like so many others, by the rhythm of being overlooked. I set the phone down and looked out the window at the quiet street below. Maybe she was reaching out, or maybe she was just remembering who I used to be. Either way, I didn't need to rush to reply. I didn't need to fix it or explain myself. The silence between us wasn't hostile. It was healing. And sometimes, healing means sitting with the memory and not letting it pull you backward. Sometimes it means saying nothing, just breathing, and letting the stillness hold you instead. Sunday afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat in my favorite chair by the window, turned off my phone, and let the sunlight spill across the floor like a slow-moving river. No distractions, no lists, just me, a notepad, and the quiet. I wasn't sure what I was trying to write. I wasn't even sure I had anything left to say. But after a few false starts, I scribbled 5 simple words across the page. "I forgive you for not knowing." I stared at the sentence, not knowing exactly who it was for. My mother, my father, Mandy, or maybe even myself. But once it was out, something inside me softened. I didn't need an apology to move forward. I just needed release. Later that day, I checked my social media, expecting more silence, but instead there was a message waiting for me. Not from Mandy, not from Mom, but from someone I'd never met. Her name was Linda, and her message read, "Karen, I saw your post last week. My daughter sent it to me. She said, 'This is how I feel.' I just wanted to say thank you for helping me understand her better." I didn't expect that. For years I'd spoken into a void, hoping someone would hear me. Now strangers were responding. Not with pity, not with judgment, but with understanding. And not just for me, for the people like me, the quiet ones, the givers, the invisible anchors of their families. I replied simply, "Thank you for listening." That night I made myself dinner from scratch, just for me. I lit a candle, played Nina Simone in the background, and sat down at the table like I mattered. Because I did. Not because someone else said so, but because I had finally decided I do. After dinner, I stood at the window again, watching the evening settle in. The world hadn't changed, my family hadn't changed, but I had. And maybe that was enough. Because sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do, especially a woman who's been everything to everyone, is to stop, to breathe, to say no more, and then choose herself. Over and over and over again. The first time I woke up and didn't reach for my phone, it felt strange, like I had forgotten something. But after a few quiet minutes lying there, sunlight brushing across the sheets, I realized nothing was missing. I got up, made coffee slowly, the way people in movies do. No rushing, no microwave, just a kettle, a French press, and time. It was the kind of morning that used to feel like a luxury, but now it felt like a necessity. I went for a walk in the park down the street, the one I used to pass without ever noticing. This time, I saw it. The couple sitting on a bench sharing a sandwich, the little boy trying to chase a squirrel, the old man with his newspaper nodding at me like we shared a secret. I found an empty bench and sat down. For once, I wasn't thinking about who needed what from me. I wasn't planning the next favor or the next errand, or how I could quietly make someone else's life easier. I was just there. Breathing, listening, existing for myself. That evening, I read a book instead of answering emails. I let dishes sit in the sink. I let silence fill the room. And you know what? The world didn't fall apart. No one showed up at my door. No fires to put out. Just quiet. Just peace. Later, I called Emily and asked if she wanted to grab lunch that weekend. She sounded surprised, then thrilled. "You're finally putting yourself first," she said, half laughing. "I love this version of you." So did I, because for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't fixing. I wasn't shrinking. I was living. Not out of rebellion, but out of restoration. A few days later, my mother showed up unannounced. I saw her through the peephole, standing there in her Sunday sweater, holding something wrapped in foil. I opened the door slowly, unsure which version of her would be waiting on the other side. "I made lasagna," she said, like it explained everything. I let her in. She moved through my apartment like she was walking through a museum, careful, observant, a little uncertain. She placed the foil-covered dish on the counter, glanced at the books stacked by the window, the half-finished puzzle on the table. "You've made a nice life here," she said. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because I wasn't sure what this was yet. She sat down at the table. I joined her. There was a long pause before she finally spoke again. "Mandy's been having a rough time," she said, eyes on her hands. "She says you haven't returned her messages." "I haven't," I answered. Another pause. "She misses you." I looked at her, steady. "She misses what I used to do for her. That's different." She flinched, just slightly. "I know you think we don't see you," she said, "but we do. We've gotten used to you always being there, always stepping in." "That's the problem," I said softly. "You all got used to me being the backup plan." She looked up at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something new in her face. Not defense, not dismissal, recognition. "I don't expect anything from you today," she said. "I just wanted to drop this off and let you know I'm trying to understand." That was it. No apology, no sweeping confession, just a quiet attempt. And honestly, it was enough. After she left, I warmed the lasagna and ate a small slice at the kitchen counter. It wasn't perfect. A little too salty, the edges slightly burned, but it was the first thing she'd given me in years that didn't come with a string attached, and somehow that made it taste better. A few weeks later, I found myself at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning, sipping fresh coffee and sampling strawberries from a local vendor. The sun was warm, the kind of warm that feels like it's giving you permission to be soft, to slow down. I saw a woman around my age standing at the same booth, holding a bunch of wildflowers. She smiled at me. "I've seen you here before," she said. "Probably," I replied, smiling back. "I'm trying to make it a habit." "Same," she said. "Trying to build a life that doesn't feel like a reaction to everyone else's needs." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was too familiar. We talked for a bit, about work, about routines, about the quiet work of rebuilding your life after years of putting everyone else first. Her name was Helen. We exchanged numbers, not with the pressure of obligation, but with the ease of possibility. Later that day, I sat at home with a journal open and the windows wide. The breeze moved through the curtains like it had nowhere else to be. I felt calm in a way that didn't beg for explanation. That's when I realized something. Freedom doesn't always show up in big moments. Sometimes it slips in through the cracks. A walk without your phone, a conversation with no hidden agenda, a Sunday afternoon without guilt. For so long, I thought peace would come after a dramatic confrontation, a moment where I finally said everything and they suddenly understood. But that moment never really came. Instead, peace came in the form of small choices: saying no, letting go, leaving the group chat, ignoring the unspoken rules. It came when I stopped explaining myself. It came when I started choosing myself. And no, not everyone celebrated that version of me. But I did. And that made all the difference. A month later, I launched a podcast. Just me, a secondhand microphone, and a quiet room filled with thoughts I'd carried for years. I called it The Forgotten Oldest Daughter. The first episode was short, raw, unpolished. I spoke about what it felt like to be the reliable one, the one who never asked for help, the one who everyone leaned on but rarely looked at. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few listens from friends, maybe a polite message or two. Instead, my inbox filled up within days. Messages from women in their 30s, 40s, 60s. From daughters who had done everything right and still ended up feeling invisible. From women who had walked away quietly, with no drama, just fatigue. From voices like mine that had been buried under decades of duty. One message stood out. It simply read, I didn't know I was allowed to choose myself until I heard your voice. I stared at that sentence for a long time, because neither did I. Until now. That evening I lit a candle, sat by the window and let the silence hold me. Not the silence of being ignored, but the silence that comes after speaking your truth out loud. And in that stillness I realized I wasn't alone anymore, and maybe I never really had been. A few weeks later, I met an old friend for coffee. Her name was Janine. We hadn't seen each other in over a decade, not since our early 30s when life was loud and full of expectations. We picked a quiet little cafe tucked between a florist and a bookstore, one of those places where time seems to move slower. She looked at me with soft eyes as we settled into our seats. "I've been listening to your podcast," she said. "I didn't know you were carrying all that." I smiled, not out of sadness, but recognition. I didn't know I was allowed to put it down. We talked for hours, about growing up, about families, about the years we lost to roles we didn't choose. There was no blame, no drama, just two women sitting across from each other, peeling back the layers. At one point, Janine reached across the table, touched my hand and said, "You were always strong, Karen, but this version of you, she's something else." And for the first time, I didn't deflect the compliment. I didn't laugh it off or redirect the conversation. I let it land. I let it be true. When we hugged goodbye, it wasn't one of those polite, quick hugs. It lingered. Quiet. Steady. Because sometimes healing doesn't roar. Sometimes it simply whispers, "You made it." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. One morning I walked down to the shoreline before the sun had fully risen. The sky was still a soft gray, the kind that makes everything feel like a secret. I stood there, barefoot in the cool sand, listening to the waves roll in and out. Gentle. Certain. Unapologetic. In my hands I held a small backpack, the same one I'd carried for years, not literally but emotionally. It had held every version of me that tried to be enough. The dutiful daughter, the fixer, the forgotten sister, the woman who smiled through the silence. And finally, I put it down. Not in anger, not in defiance, but in peace. Because that's what healing taught me. It's not always loud, it's not always dramatic. Sometimes, healing looks like walking away from roles that never fit. Sometimes it's choosing quiet mornings over forced conversations. Sometimes it's the strength to say, "I love you, but I love me too." To every woman who's ever been the one they always call, but never thank. To the ones who stayed quiet so others could be comfortable. To the ones who kept showing up, hoping one day it would be enough. You don't have to earn your worth through exhaustion. You already are enough. This is your permission slip to rest, to speak, to choose you. And if my story feels like your story, if even one part of it rang true, then maybe it's time to begin your own version of walking away. Not from love, but from the weight that love should have never required. Share this with someone who needs it. Leave a comment if you've been there, and subscribe if you're ready to keep choosing yourself, one quiet, powerful moment at a time. Because this isn't the end. It's the beginning of you.